Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. As Marla has mentioned, we'll be looking at doing word mail merging. Now, in Donman, we actually use Word quite a number of times for various reasons. For things like doing appeal letters, we do our receipts generally using Microsoft Word, and there are other times where perhaps for reminder letters or other purposes where we can produce letters to go out to our client or our donors. So for that reason, it's very important to actually have a good understanding of how mail merging works in Word. Now, for today's webinar, we'll basically be concentrating on Word and not really a lot in Donman, but I will be using some Donman data and looking at how to produce that very quickly for these purposes. Now, I'm using Word 365, which is essentially the same as Word 2016, and I believe Gary's doing the same. If you have a previous version of Word from about 2007 onwards, then everything should look the same. If you have a version prior to 2007, then the procedures will be the same, but the actual screens will be a little bit different. So I'm going to start off first of all by just looking at an overview of the process of doing that. So to do that, I'm going to actually start with Donman, even though I said I'm not really going to do that. But if we have a selection file, and let's suppose that we're going to do an appeal letter or some form of letter to all the people in my selection file, in Donman, I can then create a mail merge data file. So by using the word mail merge data file, you obviously get the hint that this is meant primarily for doing a word merge. And what that will produce for me is a file that I give it the name of, in this case, my output file. And for each of the donors in my selection file, I've got the output information such as title, first name, surname, etc., all the various fields. In my diagram, you'll see that there are little arrows between the bits of information. Basically, they're representing what a tab would be, and in this case, it's what I call a tab delimited file or text file. So once I've actually got that, so that file in this case has come from Donman, but it could come from any other system on your machine. You can use other forms of data such as Excel files and all sorts of other things as well. So in Microsoft Word, I'm going to then use that information with what's called a mail merge master document, or you might think of that or call it a template. That file or document has basically got fields in it, and you can see those things here where I've got title, first name, surname, etc. I can place those on my document wherever I want, and then when I do my merge, it's actually going to substitute the information from my text file in place of those fields on the document to produce one letter, if I'm doing a letter, for each of the people in my text file. So we do that using a process called finish and merge. And here you can see, as a result of the merge, I've now got a new document with the first page, the second page, the third page, and however many bits of information or however many records I have in my file. So basically, the merge consists of two main parts: the actual data source, which you provide, and then you've got this master merge document or a template, and then from that you can produce the final result, and this is what then would typically get printed. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to go into Word and actually have a look at trying to do that. But to begin with, we'll actually go into Donman. I have a selection file somewhere in there that I want. Oh, can't even see where Donman is running. Okay, oh, there, oh, that was it. Okay, so let me just maximize that. Okay, so I've got my file. I'm going to go into donor appeals. Let's assume I've created the selection file. So here we've got this option for create mail merge data file. So when I go in there, I can pick the selection file that I want, and I'm going to sort this by date because I've already forgotten the name where I called it. That's not the one I want. My appeal. Okay. So again, we're not concentrating on the Donman side of things, so I'm just going to brush through this. This particular question here that says formatted name and address with empty lines removed or separate fields, it's up to you which of those you choose. If I do separate, I'm going to get a separate title, first name, surname, position, company, etc., etc. Whereas if I choose formatted, then I'm going to get address 1 through to address 8, where Donman will actually put the information together into up to 8 address lines. I'll use separate, and so when we look at the actual creating the merged document, I'll have to put in individual fields, whereas if I had chosen formatted, then I would simply put address 1, address 2, address 3, etc. on there. So it's a little bit quicker that way, but generally speaking, separate gives you a little bit more flexibility. So I'm going to create a file, and I don't want to call it appeal.txt, so I might just call it myappeal.txt to match the same name as my selection file, which I've already created in the past. So I'm just going to overwrite that. And on this second screen, you can see here, these are the fields that it's going to create by default because I've chosen separate fields, and there's some extra information there that I'm not going to worry about at this stage. So when I click on continue, there's only 9 records there, but it's now produced that file for me. So that's all I need from Donman. So everything else from here on is going to be done in Word. So I've got Word here, and what I'm going to do is produce a new template to do that. So there are a number of different ways of going about this, but typically, obviously you have to go into mailings. There is a wizard that you can use, but for something as simple as, say, just a normal letter, I think that's probably a little bit of overkill. So by default, when I create a template, it's going to be for a letter. So I don't even need to go into Start Mail Merge. However, later on, we'll have a look at perhaps doing some labels, and you can see we can do envelopes and all sorts of other types of merges. So the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to tell it where to get my data from. So we go to this Select Recipients, and because I've already got that data in a separate file, I'm just going to use this option here, Use an Existing List. So now what I need to do is I need to navigate to where my data is. So that's in my webinar version of the DM work. And because this is already sorted in date order, you can see that that file that I've just created is right at the top. So I just simply select that. Now that I've done that, you can see that all of these other options up here are now available to me, or at least most of them were. Whereas before that I had done that, these were all grayed out and I couldn't do any of that. So now what I need to do is actually insert those merge fields onto my template wherever I want those to be. So I can say insert merge field, and I can say I want the title, and then I'll add a space, and then I'll put in their first name and a space, their surname and a space, and post-nominals, or the letters after a person's name, and then I'll go for a new line. Now, rather than going one by one like that, another way is if I click up the top, then I get the full list over here, and I can just double click each of these one by one, and it's just adding them straight after each other. And after postcode, I'd like their salutation as well. So having done that, now I can split those up into separate lines so that it comes out the way I want it to on my document. And then between state and, oops, I've done that wrong, haven't I? I need a space there. Suburb, state, and postcode are obviously on the same line. And then maybe a couple of lines down, I can put my salutation. And then we need to actually probably put some words there rather than just having the name and address at the top. So, you know, you could say, we are writing, oops, I'm doing some bad typing here, writing to you to ask for, and obviously the rest of your letter would go on at that stage. So if you want to see what it's going to look like, we have up here this preview results. Now at the moment you can see this is looking at record 1. So when I click on that, you can now see what the first letter is going to look like. Okay, but I can also then go to the second letter, to the third, etc., and I can work my way through those just to make sure that it looks fine. that everything's all right. Okay, so this is the merge template or the master merge document at this stage. So it's a good idea at this stage, if you're thinking you're going to use this as a fairly standard letter heading or the start of standard letter, it's probably worthwhile saving this away. So you can just go save as, go to, I'll put it into my DM work directory, and I'll just call it standard letter or something like that. Now, at this stage, I haven't actually done the merge. I'm just doing the preview results. So often it's better to leave it like that so that you know that this is the master document. This is not the result of the merge. So I've got 9 records in my source data file. So in order to produce those 9 letters, what I need to do is I need to go to the finish and merge. And we've got a few options there. We can send it as email, which is probably not a very good way of doing that. We can print those directly to the printer, but what we would typically do, especially if it's a fairly small file, is we can just click on Edit Individual Documents, and we now have some options here as well. So typically, if you want to do them all, you would just leave it as all. You could just do the current record, probably not that useful, but you can also say, well, I don't want to do all 9, I'll just do from numbers 1 through to 5. Now, bear in mind that this is records within my data source. That's nothing to do with my donor number. So it's just going to merge the first 5 rather than doing all 9. So if I go OK, here's my first letter. There's a second one. It's probably not updating very fast on your screen, so I won't go through them all. But essentially, we now have, and if we look down the bottom, 5 separate letters that you could then send and print those off. Having done the merge as well, if there was anything that you wanted to tailor specifically, so you might want to say, actually, we know Jules pretty well. Let's actually update him and we'll say Jules. So you can do that before you actually send that to your printer. So that's the standard practice. So the merge itself is simply take the master document and assign it to some sort of data source and then do the finish and merge. Now I'm going to close this. I don't need to save this. So I'll say don't save. Now, if I've actually saved this away, which I did, then what you can do is next time that you want to do another mail merge, you can create the data source like we've done, perhaps from Donman or from somewhere else. If that's in a different file to the one that this is associated with, all you need to do is go click Recipients, use existing list, and then point it to wherever your new data is. And if it's not the same letter that you want, you would obviously change the wording in here. So that's the very simple one, and most of the time you probably will be doing merges to letters. However, there are times where you may wish to perhaps produce a set of labels, and doing the labels is fairly similar, but there are a few little differences that you need to be aware of. So I might close that down. Now, I don't need to save that again, and I'll just start with a new document. Now, I'm going to go again to mailings. This time, when I click on here, I'm going to choose labels. Okay, now when I do that, it's brought up this little box here where I can choose some standard letters or standard label sheets. Now, I've got one here that's the J8160 from Avery, and a lot of other manufacturers of labels will actually say, well, this is equivalent of Avery or Unistat or something like that. So there are a number of different options within here of the different manufacturers. So if you can find the one that you're after, then it makes life a lot easier rather than you having to actually define it. So let me see if I can find that, the one I want. Again, it was J8160, almost there. 8160. Yes, I cannot. Need to go one more. Okay, so it gives you some details here. If you need more details, you can click on this, but essentially this is 3 across and 7 down. So once I go OK to that, I'm back to my document, and again, I need to select where I'm going to get my data from. So I'll just use the same file as before. So in my DM work directory, it's this myappeal.txt, and now you can see it's put in these extra fields that says next record. So they stay there. All I need to do is add merge fields to the first label. So again, I can do these one by one, or I can just do them several at a time. Okay, and just need, oops, close that. Put in spaces where necessary, and carriage returns in other locations. Now you can see that my line spacing this time is not very good. So I'm just going to go back to home and set that to normal, so that now compresses, and I'll just make this a little bit smaller in case they don't necessarily fit. So I'll just continue as before, suburb, state, and postcode, and you may choose to put something extra like a donor number on there or something along those lines. Now, I don't need to repeat that for all of those. All I need to do is go back to my mailings and click on update labels, and you can see it has now replicated that first label through all the labels in my document. And again, I can choose the preview results to see what it's going to look like. Now, if I'm not sure if I'm using a certain type of label for the first time, what I would typically do is print the first sheet off, and then I'd hold that up to a sample of the labels just to make sure that everything is aligned correctly. Now, again, at this stage, I haven't actually done the merge. So to do the merge, it's a case of finish and merge, edit individual, and I'll just do them all this time. And essentially, I now have a final document, which in this case still only has those same 9 people on there. So you can do very similar sorts of things, setting up the different envelopes if you wanted to print directly to envelopes, although that's probably not done that often. So essentially, that's the main thing that you need to know for doing a very simple, straightforward merge. There are some other options that are available that we're not going to go into today, simply because it is a sort of basic word merging that we're looking at. But you can do filtering, or you can, once you've done it, as I mentioned before, you can actually change the data. So again, if I've got Jules Verne's manager, looks like I didn't put one of my fields in the right spot there. I think I must have, I won't say that. If I undo the preview results, yes, I forgot to put position on the next line. So now I can again update labels, so that goes through. Now manager is on the second line, not next to the person's name. So at this stage, I'm going to hand over to Gary, who will take you through some other features of the word merge.
Thanks, Murray, and welcome everybody. So as Murray sort of mentioned, all Donman does for the purpose of the actual mail merge is create the data. There's no real link between Donman itself and your Word documents as you go through. So the two ways that when you create the data, you can create the fields that come out into what's called either formatted fields, which in the case of receipting, as we've got on the screen here, means that if I look at the data, and I've got through, so my address 1 field basically contains the title, first name, surname, and would also have post nominals. Then it will go from address 1 down to address 6. Yeah. So having the option to do this allows me to do a whole lot less fields that I need to put in at the time I'm doing my mail merge, but also I've got an option that I can choose in Word to say, look, I want there to be 6 lines here so that my salutation is fairly consistent where it starts. So when I'm folding these, especially if we're putting them into envelopes, or even if we're not, that we've got a consistent fold point that we can always say, So you can see if I do preview results, you can see in this case here, there's extra lines between the address, but the salutation itself doesn't move up at all. So it's basically staying there. So if I were to scroll through the records, if I had people, so in this case, I've got 4 lines, but now I've only got 3 between those. So it just means that when I do that, I can control that. In order to do that, pardon me, you need to have a thing up the top here called the Mail Merge Helper. You can add that. It's not there by default on your quick launch bar in Word. But if you click on the little button up the top here, go to More Commands, and then All Commands. So basically every command that's available in Word to do something, you can add to your quick launch bar. So things that you quite often do, it's very easy to sort of go through and say, beautiful, this is what I'm looking for. So if we type an M in, it takes us closer to where we need to be. And if you scroll down, you'll see Mail Merge Helper. So you can just click on the Add button and move that across, and you can move things up and down in here to be in the order that you want them to be. Okay, so if I click on the Mail Merge Helper, and for people who've been using Word and have merged for quite a long time will know this was primarily the way we used to do mail merging, before we had the ribbon bar and things like that. But down the bottom here, it's basically got you can create, you can get your data, and in this case, merge. Okay. If I click on the merge option, there's one here that says don't print blank lines if the field's empty, or print blank lines. So it's this one here that's giving me that control to say I don't want the salutation and for that purpose the whole letter moving up and down the page, especially if I'm doing windowed envelopes, because that they then may start showing the salutation and even the first line of the letter in the window. If you're doing barcoding, the windows that you'll need to have on your envelopes will need to be bigger in order to allow for space for potentially 6 lines of address as well as the barcode itself. So the barcode is normally a 20-point font, so it's roughly 2 lines in normal spacing. So you need to have a much bigger window for that. Okay? So if I turn that off and close again, so if I preview results now, so you can see that the salutation and the whole letter have basically moved up. So as I scroll from letter to letter, because that's moving up and down, in this case not too much because I've only got a few records, but it will move up and down. So if I did have somebody that had a position and a company and maybe 2 lines of street address, then suburb, state, postcode, this could be changing by 2 or 3 lines, and that can be very annoying to do that. Yeah. So the Mail Merge Helper is a nice tool to add to your version of Word, or so that you can sort of have that option there. If you do separate fields, that's not a good option. The reason being is that if I've got separate fields, and I go here and say like Murray had, and we had, street 1, street 2, street 3, if I say leave the line blank even if it's empty, then I'm going to have gaps in my address line. Okay, so this only really works well if we're doing formatted fields. So where that comes about in Donman, if we quickly go back, donor appeals, create mail merge data file, and you'll see as we go about halfway down here, it's got formatted name and address with empty fields removed or separate fields. So for most things, if I'm just creating data to send to somebody else, or I'm sending it to a mail house, or I want to put it into Excel, separate fields very handy because I can then sort by every field that I've got. I can sort by title or surname, suburb, postcode, all of those fields. Whereas when I do formatted fields, I don't have that option. So if you're setting up a template, you can do it both ways. So you can go through and say, when I've got my selection file of people here, and go through, so count how many records you've got. If we were to say formatted fields there, and leave the default name as appeal.txt, when you get to the next screen, you can go through and you can see at the top, I've now got address 1 to 8, so they're all my formatted fields. But down the bottom, I've also selected all the separate fields. So that way it gives me the flexibility to use the data one way or the other. Yeah. And then just continue and go through as normal. Okay, So that's sort of the Donman part of it. But that's really just to highlight the difference between those two sorts of fields. So you have got the formatted, etc. So primarily, because we're doing .ren, then you'd say, okay, yes, I'm doing a mail merge, and the data is always going to be from Donman or DM Work. But that's not necessarily always going to be the case. So if I were to start a new document, said, okay, I need to set this up as a mail merge. So again, go to mailings. And as you can see, at the moment, I've really only got two buttons that I can utilize. I've got the Start Mail Merge, and that gives me the option to say, am I doing letters, email addresses, envelopes, etc. If you're just doing a letter, you can skip that stage because by default, Word is about doing a letter. So, but from there, I can do Select Recipients and use the existing list. Okay. So you can see in here under my data sources, I've got a Microsoft data file that I can select. And if I go to Insert Merge Field, it's now pulling the fields from that Microsoft data file. So exactly the same principle would exist if I were using, say, an Excel sheet. So again, if I select Recipients, use an existing list, and in this case, I've got an Excel file. Okay, it comes up saying, what scope of the file. So by default, it chooses the whole file that's got data. And down the bottom here, it's got first row contains the column names or the headers. So if I do OK, and again, insert merge field, so you can see now I've got all my fields, but then it's now coming from an Excel file. You don't need to put the data into Excel if you're just trying to do the mail merge. So lots of times, people have contacted Murray and myself when they're doing a mail merge that they've created the data in Donman, they then put that into Excel, and then they save it as an Excel file, and then use that to do the mail merge. Unless you really need to do something with the data, try and resist that because there are fields that Excel will muck up on you. Okay, primarily, things like postcode. If you've got people that are in the Northern Territory, the postcode will start with 0. So Excel by default takes a 0 off the front of the number. And the same with phone numbers. So in your data, if you've got 03 space 4 numbers, or all your mobiles have got 04 whatever the number is space 4, then this doesn't become a problem. But lots of times you import data from peer-to-peer fundraising or from other places where the data hasn't been formatted nicely. So when you put it into Excel, it basically just says, okay, that's a number. So it takes a 0 off the front. So it makes those fields non-usable if you're trying to do something else with them. Okay. So even though I've selected an Excel file, I can still choose the fields and go through exactly the same as Murray did previously. Okay, they might be called slightly different names. So it might be organization instead of company, what comes out of Donman, etc. But the end result is really exactly the same. Okay, so it's just a matter of the mail merging is really just saying, here's my document. Either I've got a document that's got text already that I'm trying to add the fields to do the merge, or I'm just starting a template like Murray showed you before, where I've got the template and I'm going to save that. And next time I can just update and paste the text of the letter down here that I want to send, because the fields that come from Donman will be fairly consistent. Something to try and avoid if you are doing receipting especially is that when you create the receipt file, sorry, I'll just shoot back to Donman for a second. So when we're doing our receipting and we go through and we're getting to this stage here to create the receipt merge data file, at that point, unlike the appeal text or whatever you call your data file doing the normal merge, this one creates a backup of the files. So in your folder, you'll end up with names.txt being the current file and names 1 to 7 being the 7 backups. Every time you run this program, it will automatically do that. So if you're trying to solve some problem with your mail merge, you don't necessarily need to keep running this program to create the data because the data is still there. The problem is always at that point going to be in Word itself. Okay, so in your receipt, it's either going to be linked to the data. So I've already got my fields and I can see that that's linked, so it's all going to work. Or I'm going to lose that. So when I open it, like when I started the new document, I'm basically going to have Start Mail Merge or Select Recipients. Okay. if perchance somebody creates a receipt file where nobody's marked for receipting, and then you open the document, the reason most organizations, when you open the document, you'll see a little message box on the screen saying the document should be opened as read-only, and normally you just enter or click on OK, because you're not changing the template itself. So you're not changing the layout or the font or the fields or any of that. You just want to be able to mail merge it. Okay? So once you get to that point, you can then go through and say, okay, I've got my receipt here. I don't need to do anything with it. I can then just finish and merge, edit individual documents, and again, all records, and that will then merge all of your receipts. Okay, so if for perchance something goes wrong with that, and one of the common things, of course, is I'll get a message here where the text should go that says something about, oh, hold on, there's no document, or I can't find the document. If that were to happen, another button that I've added up the top here can be used two different ways. You can see it's showing on the screen here under the tooltip that it's Alt F9, or I can add this button here. Okay. So if I click on the button, it changes the way that I'm seeing the actual document. Okay. And sometimes where you have a letter, one of your thank you letters that might have the amount field in or different fields, then you can use this button or Alt F9 to actually see what's going on behind the scenes. Otherwise, you only see the result of the field itself. Okay. So in this case here, the primary field is this one here. So it says include text, and from there we have the path to where your letters are. Okay, so in this case, it's saying on my C drive, Donman DM Work, there's a letters folder, and there's a field in here called letter number, and at the end, it's got doc or docx. When we create a document in older versions of Word, so pre-2007, the file extension was doc, so it's just doc. 2007 and everything up to current versions of Word, the extension was changed to docx. Okay, it's not just a extension change, it actually changes the whole format of the document. So in the receipt field here, I can't have doc and then asterisk, because I can have two documents called the same name that have got different extensions. So I do need to either have my documents all saved in the new format as docx or in the old format as doc, and then I change this field here to suit how my documents are being saved. If I've got something wrong there, and I do the merge and it comes up saying, oh, I can't find the document, if you push Alt F9, where it's got merge field letter number, it will actually show you the letter or the document name that it's trying to open from this location. If we wanted to have a look at that in the raw data form, I'll just go back here. If we go to edit recipient list, and we have all of our fields here, as you go across, you'll see there's a field called letter no. Okay, so in this case, I've got two letters that don't actually have a code, which means that if I do this mail merge, it will certainly generate an error message, because it's saying my documents should be called something, like I've got my Gen Don letters, or it might be my letter Xmas, or my letter tax, or my letter Easter, whatever the actual different letters are, should have a code here. So normally that is set up in Donman when we do the campaign setup, and we've sort of discussed that when we've run the webinar on setting up campaigns. But this will tell me straight away that there is a problem. Okay, so if I were to do my merge now, all records, okay, so you'll get a message like this saying a field calculation error occurred in record 1, and then again in record 3. Okay, so you're going to get this horrible message here that everyone goes, oh my goodness, what to do? So then we go back to Donman and create the data again, hoping that that's going to solve the problem, but we're not, really changing anything. So that's what I was sort of trying to, get across, is don't need to run the data again in Donman. It's saying that there's something wrong. So again, if I push my Alt F9 buttons, it's now saying I'm looking for a document called letter.docx. If I look in this folder, I'll see there is no document called letter by itself with no extension. So that means in my data, I've got a problem. Okay. So if I then said what I need to do is close down my merged document, go back to my data source. So edit recipient list from my receipt document. Down the bottom here, you'll see data source, and it's got the name of the file that's attached to this document as the data. If I click on there, I've then got the edit button available. So this will show me one record at a time. So I could then go down and say, oh, that should have been the tax letter. So I can then update it here, scroll through and also find my other one that was wrong, and then just close that. So in my data now, all of my records, so my 4 donation records, have now all got a correct letter attached to them. So I don't need to go back and change the data, because when you've recorded the donation or someone's recorded the donation in Donman, it means that a letter wasn't selected. And that's how we got to the point of having just letter with no code after that. So if I fix that up, I should now be able to go through all records. Okay. And in this case now, no error messages. Okay. So it's basically gone through and done the mail merge, and I haven't got the error message. So we don't necessarily have to go through. Sorry, I'll just close these ones and do anything with Donman again, because it has created the data that we needed. Everything from there is just to do with Word itself. And most of the problems that people will have with receipting or mail merging in general will be to do with Word. One of the other things that Murray sort of touched on before was the formatting of the fields. So by default, when you get one of the newer versions of Word, for all its niceties, it does have a bit of a painful setting as far as what's called the normal style. Okay, so the style itself controls the font and the layout and the language and other things like that. So when you do the merge, sometimes you might find that your letter is all together like this. I've got my address 1 to 6, and that's all looking lovely. But then when I merge the letter, my spacing is all double spaced. Where that comes from is if you right-click on this normal style and then modify, you'll see in here, this is saying that my standard font when I do a new document is Calibri 11. And down the bottom here, it's got the line spacing is single. If you've just got a new version of Word put in or a new computer, when you open that up, under your paragraph, it'll have either something like, I think the earlier versions had something like 10.5 line spacing here, and then it had multiple lines here, so it had different spacing, so that when you do your merge, as you can see there straight away, horrible effect on your letters. So everything becomes spaced out. Your receipt ends up at the bottom of the second page, and you go, oh gosh, what's happened here? So for most organizations, the best thing to do and way to rectify that is make sure that all of the documents, all of the people who will be writing the letters that are going to be used for your normal merging are set as the same style. So in this case, if I go down here and say I'm going to set that for good, I want new documents based on this template to be selected, and then format paragraph. So in this case, I want to change that back to 0 and single spacing. So since we do the change, you'll see my document automatically changes. So there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the document itself. Word is just applying a style that you don't necessarily want it to have. Okay, so if somebody's using, when they start a new document, it comes up with Times New Roman, then that's going to be embedded in the letter that you sort of merge. So when you merge, you don't want to have it where you've got, the name and address is one font, the letter's a different font, and then the receipt is another font again. You want to have this nice and consistent all the way through. Something else that may happen as far as this merging is concerned is if I look at my field here and say, okay, there's my letter, you can see when I click on it, everything goes highlighted, which is indicating to me that this is a field. The text isn't really there. But if I were to go through and say, oh, I want to change the font on that bit of the text to be, 12 or something like that, and go, okay, that's exactly how I want it to look. What Word has done in the background And again, if I press Alt F9 or click on my button here, Word has put this little switch at the end of my field, which is the slash asterisk merge format command. What that will do is actually pick up attributes from your letter and sprinkle it through your merge. So you may find that you may have manager and director in the letter in bold, but that bold attribute may end up as a word in one person's letter. It may end up a letter in the middle of a word even. It just does horrible things to the actual formatting and the the way the fonts come across and what happens with them. So if perchance you were to change that, just to say, look, I'm trying to get my receipt so that my font is correct all the way through, certainly, yes, you can highlight everything and say, look, I want to now make that Calibri, and I want to make it 11, so I'm consistent. But when you do, make sure that you go back to this mode here, so push Alt F9, go to the end of your field, and delete everything up to the last bracket. So don't delete the last bracket, because then your field is broken basically and it won't work. So if you do that, that will save hours of pain and anguish of trying to figure out what's wrong with your letters or what's wrong with the merge, because what will happen is you'll go back and look at the actual letter and go, the letter looks fine. I don't know what's going on here. And it's only when you merge it that you'll end up with a mixture of fonts and things like that, which will cause all sorts of angst and things like that go through. Okay. So the guts of it is really the receipting is, once you get it set, normally you won't need to change the receipt template at all. It's then just a matter of writing a new letter, making sure that the style and the font and everything is set correctly, so that when you get to this stage of merging your receipts, you don't have to stop and get stuck all the time. You don't want to be band-aiding by saying, oh, I have to highlight this and change the font and then print them out. And doing that every day is just sort of counterproductive, because you're not saying let's fix the problem once and for all the way through. Yeah. So this button here, the one that I've showed you before, the View Field Codes, is put exactly the same way. Just go to Customize, More Commands, All Commands, and if we type a V in this case, All Commands, click down here, type a V, and then scroll down from there, and you'll see the one with the red brackets around View Field Codes. Okay. So very handy one to have for doing your letters and things like that ready for the merge. Another good idea is when you're doing the letters especially, is to make sure that you have this paragraph marker in, so that you can actually see where carriage returns are in spaces, because sometimes in a letter, you may have it where you only have a few lines of text. Okay, so we've got whatever our text is, like that. So someone's done their letter, and then inadvertently they've pasted in, and there's a whole lot of carriage returns, which you can't see if this isn't turned on. What that will do, though, is when I do my merge, may push my receipt down to the bottom of the second page, because it's saying the receipt's basically going to get run into by the text if Word doesn't do that. So if you do editing the letters, just make sure, have that on. So where you've got, managing director or whatever the person's title may be who's signing the letters, just make sure at the end of that, delete all those extra carriage returns and then save your letter. And again, will hopefully be a good tip for, saving you a bit of a headache for the receipt merging specifically. The document merging, like the appeal letters and things like that, normally don't have quite as many problems, because you are really just saying, look, I'm starting a document from scratch, I'm putting in my data, and then I'm merging it. Okay, so the receipt is a little bit more complex as we go through. So in the receipt, it's really made up of these three components. So you've got your fields as you go through, the include text line, which contains those three primary parts. One is the field itself, so the include text. Then the path to where Donman is encapsulated in the quotation marks. In the path, you'll notice that it's got two slashes, okay? Because when Word's doing the lookup of the document, it ignores one of these, so we need to have the two slashes in there. If perchance you've got a network where you're using UNC pathing, and if you don't know what that is, don't worry about it, but it's just another way of identifying things on a network, then sometimes you'll need 3 or 4 slashes in there in order for Word to be able to just go back and say, okay, that's the actual field. Whether your documents are saved into DM Work itself or there's a letters folder under that, we just need to make sure that this path here is exactly what we want it to have. Okay, and the extension, as I said before, either needs to be the doc or the docx, depending on and most people now would be on a newer version of Word because it's 9 years old now, 2007. So most people, if you're doing it from scratch or you're tidying up all your letters, etc., then best to save them in the new format with the docx extension, so you don't have to worry about that. The receipt down the bottom of the screen is basically in a text box, which is locked to the position on the screen so that it doesn't move up and down the page when you're doing the merge. So if you've got a short letter, the receipt's still in the same position, or a longer letter, as long as the letter doesn't get too close to the text, because otherwise Word by default will move the text box to the bottom of the next screen. But it just means this isn't going to jump up and down the screen and then end up right at the top. It is nothing but a field, a table in that text box with fields in it. So it's really just layout. There's no, hard and fast rules for that. It can look exactly like you want. You can put your graphics in there. You can change colors. You can do what you like with it. It's really just saying, by having it in a table, in this case, all of the grid lines are showing, but normally you could turn those off. So it makes it look a whole lot neater. And then when you merge, you're really just getting the data and the final finish that you want it to be. Whether you're doing the receipts on pre-printed paper or it's, on your receipt template, you've got the letterhead and the footer, then you can put those into the receipt template so that when you merge, it is the complete document. As I said earlier, when you open this, normally you'll get a message like this saying the author would like to open this as read only. The yes button is on by default, so all you need to do is either enter or click on yes, and that will open the document, but it means you won't be able to make any change to the template itself. You can merge it, but you can't do anything else. When you first go in, you may get this, where you've only got the start mail merge or select recipients. It just means that the data file, doesn't matter whether it's the receipts or a letter or labels, the data file that was attached to the document or hasn't yet been attached is basically there's no link between your letter or your document and any data file at all. So you just need to go through those steps to select recipients, find your file, be it an Excel file, a text file, whatever, so that you can then put the fields in as you go through. The one that I just ran through there is basically showing you here that you've got, when I've done my merge, error not a valid file name. So pushing Alt F9 will then show me the include text line, and in this case, it's got letter crisps. So I would have to go and look, because I've got an error, go and look into this folder and see if I've actually got a document called this and make sure that it has got the extension of docx. If it's not there, I need to put the letter there, or again, I need to edit my recipient list to change that so that it actually points to a valid document so I can do the merge all the way through. But I don't have to go back into Donman and run that, create receipt merge data file again, because the data itself's not changing unless I go all the way back, open my batch, do some editing in the donations, and then recreate that file again from scratch. So if it's just the receipting itself, try and avoid doing that as we go through. So hopefully that's covered a few of the common things and basic things on doing mail merges, not so much to do with Donman, but just Word itself that'll help everyone make this a much easier process for you.